Hi, Rita. Welcome. Welcome, everyone, to the Living Parsha. Sorry, we're a little all over the place today, late, or early, usual, later than we're supposed to be, but we're here. And we have new here for the class, Sarah, right? You could if you want, make yourself comfortable. So this week we're in Parsha Emor. So if you have a Chumash with you, we are on page 754. Okay. Parsha Emor 754. If you have it with you, if you want to follow online, you have a text at chabad.org/parsha, Parsha. So Emor is a very interesting parsha, and as we usually do, we can go through the parsha pretty quickly and then focus on one particular detail. So Emor, in the context, we're in Leviticus, and we're speaking about the temple service of the priests, for the most part, and the installation of the priests. And last week we had the post-installation where Aaron's two children unfortunately died on the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. And then we had bulls of Yom Kippur, which were associated with the temple. And the first half of Emor picks up on that theme, speaking about the priests, the Kohanim. And the priests had a unique role in the Jewish society, which today is largely missing, right? We have obviously still have the status. You get the first call into the Torah, the first Aliyah, they get some respect. But for the most part, the priest's role was to serve in the temple. And that's been lost, unfortunately. But together with that responsibility of temple worship also came certain restrictions the priests had. And the parsha opens up with some of those restrictions. For example, a priest was not allowed to come into contact with a corpse. When someone passes away, someone dies, there's certain impurity that takes root in their body. And the reason for that is because purity or holiness or sanctity is life. So Judaism places the sanctity of life over everything. And we neglect or we override almost every mitzvah for saving a life. Because life is sacred. When life is taken from someone, you have a body that's lifeless, then there's sort of a lack of energy gives root to impurity. And so coming into contact with the corpse leads someone to have spiritual impurity. Obviously, there's no dirt, there's no practical thing, but it's a status of impurity that a high Kohen, a priest, was not allowed to do temple worship if they were in a state of impurity. The exception to that rule is the immediate relatives of the priest. So if a Kohen has parents, siblings, children, immediate relatives, they're allowed to go to their funeral and participate and become impure because that's kind of a personal, family relationship. After going through that, then there's another restriction. A Kohen to serve in the temple wasn't allowed to have any deformity. And this is a very interesting thing for itself. Serving in the temple was kind of this, had to be fit perfectly. And anyone who was even being left-handed disqualified you. Wow. Having certain, limbs longer than the other, broken arm, but anything that was seen to be irregular, and in those days, the left-handed was seen to be irregular, what disqualified a Kohen from being part of the temple service. So that's the first half of the parsha speaks about the Kohen and their restrictions. The second half of the parsha pivots and speaks about the Chagim, the Jewish festivals. This is one of the few places in Torah we have a lengthy description in chronological order of the festivals, starting from Passover. The Torah tells us to celebrate Passover in the month of Nisan. Then we're told about the Omer count, which we'll get into tonight, soon. Shavuot. Then we have Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. And so all the festivals and their associated offerings in the temple are listed in this parsha. It ends up being this parsha is read more often than other parshas. Because we read it in the cycle right now. This Shabbat, we'll read the parsha. Also, on the holidays, we go back in time and we go to this parsha because it speaks about the holidays. And so we go out of the cycle, out of the regular cycle when it comes to a holiday, and we read about the holiday. And some of the time we read from this parsha. For me personally, it's my Bar Mitzvah parsha. So I know it very well, and I get to read it on the holidays as well. So it's an extra perk.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yes, my birthday on the Jewish calendar was last Shabbat, and on the regular calendar is this coming Shabbat, 17th of May. So we're smack in the middle between my two birthdays. So, and then the end of the parsha has this really interesting story about a Jew that cursed God, and Moses and the Jewish people are unsure what should be the consequence and how to interact. And they put him sort of into prison until they figure out prison is not really part of the Jewish legal system, a penal system. This is the exception. There's temporary holding cell until they figure out how to deal with him, and then God eventually tells Moses it's a capital offense what this person did, and he has to be put to death. And that's the end of the parsha. And we learn the last thing we learn is the principle: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which isn't meant literally in Judaism. So there's many proofs the Talmud brings that although the Torah uses the language an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, it is not meant to be read in its literal sense. Rather, it means a punishment which is a consequence commensurate towards the crime you did. So if you've damaged someone, you've punched someone, you measure up their pain and their lack of work and their injury and their doctor's bills, and you pay that amount. It's not a literal tooth for a tooth, but you give the value of the tooth. What damage you've done, you pay up that amount for the hurt. And that's the overview of the parsha in a nutshell.
So say you pay up. I mean, it's always or most often a monetary payment.
Yes, for damages to someone, is you owe them damages, right? So it's like a civil case, and whatever damages they can sort of sue you for, basically. The Talmud speaks of 5 categories of damages. There's the pain, there's the loss of work, there is the value of the person, the injury, sort of how much that's hurt you, damaged you as a person. There is embarrassment, the shame that you went through by being hit by this person. That's going to depend, where they hurt you in the middle of the street. That's pretty embarrassing. And the last one is pain. Say pain. Yeah,
Yeah, you did.
it's doctor's bills. The payment you cost of healing, doctor's bills. So those 5 categories, that's the amount you would pay damages. Yeah. So what I want to focus on tonight is something which is relevant right now, which is why I'm thinking about
sorry. I'm sorry. Can I interrupt? I'm sorry. I know we got to rush.
Sure.
Let's say in the case of murder.
Yes, the murder is not a financial. That's a capital crime.
And the Torah does prescribe death as a punishment for capital crime.
Yes,
for murder.
in the right circumstances. Under the right circumstances, it has to be witnesses and warnings,
right.
But ultimately, murder it could be a capital crime if everything's met. Didn't happen. The Talmud says a Jewish court that put someone to death every 70 years was considered a murderous court, meaning it wasn't so common because they had to a lot of criteria to be met for that, But
okay, thanks.
So we had the holiday of Passover a couple weeks ago, and in a few weeks we have the holiday of Shavuot, June 2nd, June 1st at night, June 2nd, June 3rd, Shavuot this year. In between those 2 holidays, which is the period we're in right now, we have what's referred to as the Omer, the count of the Omer. And that is a 49-day count, 7 weeks, from the 2nd day of Passover until Shavuot. It's exactly 7 weeks. The reason it's called Omer is because on Passover they would bring an offering called the Omer offering. Omer offering was a barley offering. It was unique. It was the only offering of the year that came a barley offering on the altar, and that was called the Omer. And that whenever the Omer was offered, you started this 7-week count. Hence the name, the Omer count, or the counting of the Omer. At the end of the 7 weeks, we're told, 50th day is going to be Shavuot, which is fascinating in its own right. There is no calendar date for the holiday of Shavuot. It's 50 days post-Passover. Now, nowadays, it's always the same day, the 6th day of Sivan on the Jewish calendar. But in ancient times, it wasn't always the case because months on the Jewish calendar are lunar months, and the cycle of the moon is 29 and a half days. So we have now a system of pretty much 1 month 29, 1 month 30, 29, 30, and it evens everything out. in ancient times, temple times, they would have to actually have witnesses who say, we noticed the new moon in the sky, and they were making the new month. And until witnesses came, we didn't know if it was a 29-day month or 30-day month. It could have been a few months in a row, 29 days, a few months in a row, 30 days, whenever they observed a new moon in the sky. So if the month of Nisan, where Passover is in, and the next month, Iyar, would both be 29 days, the 50-day count would lead you to the 7th of Sivan, because you've lost a day. If both were 30 days, you had a longer time, the count would end on the 5th of Sivan. So Shavuot didn't have a set calendar date. And the reason for that is because it's kind of a continuation of Passover. It's an extension of Passover. The Jews left Egypt with a very specific goal in mind. We're leaving Egypt, going away from slavery towards what? Becoming Jews, receiving the Torah at Sinai. So the first half of freedom was a freedom from slavery, but they needed the freedom to be themselves, to be the best version of themselves, to get the Torah at Sinai. And so it's considered one long continuation of Exodus until they reach Sinai 7 weeks later. And so to highlight that, Torah says Shavuot is not going to be a holiday of its own, almost. It's going to be 50 days post-Passover. You're always going to set its date, its time, from the context of Passover, Pesach. So we have this count we're in now, the Omer count. 7 weeks, 49 days. And this week's Parsha speaks about it. And I want to point out a few interesting details which give us very deep insight into this time period and specifically what it can mean to us today. So if you'll open the Chumash, we have it here, we're on page page 766. Sorry, 768.
I'm on the
We're on
Chabad.org.
chapter 23, verse 15.
Thank you. Hold on.
So the Torah has just spoken about the Omer offering and how you bring it and how it should be observed. And then in verse 15, we'll read in the English the bold words, starting on the day after the day of rest. From the day you bring the Omer as a wave offering, you must count for yourself 7 weeks. These 7 weeks should be complete, 7 full weeks. You must count until the day after the 7th week, the 50th day. You must bring a grain offering to God of the new crop, which is the holiday of Shavuot. Okay? So this is these two verses, and there's another reference to later in Torah as well, serve as the foundation of the Omer count. Okay? So let's notice a couple of things in these verses that I think are significant. First of all, are we counting 7 weeks or are we counting 49 or 50 days? Is there a difference? They seem to be the same, but it's difference. You know what the difference is? When you count the week, it's a once-a-week thing. I'm counting the end of the week, we finished the week. Count the days, every single day. Count that day. The count here is meant to be an active count. Every day, we actually say, today is this day of the count. Not just calculate it and figure it out. The second interesting thing is, count for yourself. So if you look at that carefully, in the first verse here, you must count for yourselves 7 weeks. As opposed to what? So the Talmud here, sorry, yeah?
As opposed to a community?
As opposed to community. So it's not meant to be just, the community should have a count, a clock, a calculation of the calendar. Each individual is counting. And this is very significant. I'll tell you why it's very significant. I experienced it this year. Right after Pesach, I traveled to Australia. My family's out there, and I flew to Australia for a weekend. Crazy trip. Thank God for a good thing on Mom's birthday. But when I flew to Australia, I crossed the international date line. So I left here Wednesday evening, flew overnight, arrived there Friday morning. So now, when I got there to Australia, they're counting Friday night of the Omer. Every night we count the Omer. Counting from their Passover, they're actually a day ahead of me. Because I'm still on the Thursday night count, even though I'm in Friday night in Melbourne, in Australia. I'm a day behind. If it's a communal count, I'm part of the Jewish community here now. If it's an individual count, I'm keeping my own score. I keep my own count. So as it were, I actually counted a different number, a different day of the Omer than everyone around me in the prayer service. But I came back here and I gained a day. I left Sunday morning. I arrived in LA on Sunday morning. Earlier than I left. I went back in time traveled. So I gained a day. So I counted the Omer, I made up for it, and now I'm back on track. If I were to stay in Australia until Shavuot, my 50th day would arrive a day after everyone else's. I would have a different Shavuot to everyone else, because count for yourselves. Don't follow everyone else's count. My Shavuot would be different to everyone else's. What? Right? So that's a really interesting thing. Why? Isn't this a communal holiday? Shavuot's a Jewish community holiday. Why are we counting individually as opposed to communally? So I want to share something very beautiful. Why are we counting these days? What's the point of it? The commentaries offer different suggestions why we count these days. Some say it's a very practical thing. Back in the day, Jews were farmers. This is a very busy season for farmers, going into spring, and you would lose track of being Shavuot. You forget to come back to Jerusalem for Shavuot. Every holiday came to Jerusalem. The Torah says, count the days, that way you will know when to come back for Shavuot. You won't get so busy in your season. It's your busy season. You'll lose track of time. Make sure you come back for Shavuot. It's a very pragmatic, practical suggestion. Others say this is a countdown to Sinai. And so we're actually anticipating receiving the Torah on Shavuot. Our ancestors originally did it, and we every year recreate the anticipation. So we count down the days. Come in.
Hello.
Hey, Seth, how are you?
How you doing?
Good, good, good.
Good.
Join. Sorry, we started a little earlier today.
Oh,
I don't know if you got the message.
Oh, okay. No worries.
But you're here.
Yes.
Yeah, 7:30. So we'll start at 7 to 8:30 today. But we catching the key part. So you're good. You're not so much here. No, here. Yeah. So some say it's a sort of anticipation. We're counting the days until we receive the Torah at Sinai, to the count of the Omer right now. And so that's how we count these days. Historically, the count of the Omer kind of shifted. It was once upon a time just a very simple, almost a joyous count, counting until we reach Shavuot. But over history, it took on a very dark nature. The days are sad, and it became a time of mourning. We have restrictions during this time. Not to have weddings during the count of the Omer. Not to have haircuts. Almost like someone who's mourning at death. And the reason is, Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest Jewish sages, about 2,000 years ago, and he had huge following. And in one period of time, this time the Omer, 24,000 students, almost all busy, his whole yeshiva, he all died of this pandemic in this very short period of time. And it seemed to be something, from God, some kind of punishment for something, a consequence, or it wasn't just a natural pandemic. And so it was a very crazy, tragic time for the Jewish community. And since then, it's observed this time of year as a time of reflection and of mourning, with these restrictions in place. The exception is Lag BaOmer. You asked about this before. The 33rd day of the Omer, his students stopped dying. And so instead of being a sad day, it turns into a joyous holiday. Also, he rebuilt after all the students died. You can imagine, he's already an older man. He's in probably, I don't know how old he was, 60s, 70s. He lost everything. All his sort of intellectual contribution is gone. And all his students are dead. He had the courage and the fortitude to rebuild. And to collect new students, he moved to a new area in the south of Israel. He found new students, and actually 5 main students he had after that, who became the source of almost all of the Talmud that we have. Those 5 students became the primary bearers of tradition that formed the Mishnah and Talmud. Chief among them, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon, who is the author of the Zohar, a very prolific rabbi in the Mishnah, and he passed away on this day of Lag BaOmer, the same day, but he asked his students the day of his passing should be a holiday, celebrate David's passing, not to be a sad day. And so Lag BaOmer becomes a day of joy, of celebration. In Israel, many people go to Rabbi Shimon's burial place in the north, in the mountaintops of Meron, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people gather there on Lag BaOmer. Unfortunately, a few years ago, there was a very tragic stampede, I don't remember, because of these crowds, and people unfortunately died. And since then, they've limited. But I've been there a few times, and it's unbelievable. Talking about all night and day buses just pulling up, buses. It's incredible. But this is his day, so and it's celebrated with bonfires often because Rishon brought the light of Judaism, of Torah, through the Zohar, the Kabbalistic works, and so the bonfire fire symbolizes light and warmth. We're having on Thursday evening a bonfire in Kumzitz, which whoever's local, love you to join. 8 o'clock, be here on Carroll Street, someone's backyard, so that'd be really nice. So Lag BaOmer is the exception. The rest of the Omer became kind of a sad kind of day.
A quick question.
Yeah.
Akiva where was his time period versus the Roman destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the Bar
He
Kokhba
lived
revolt?
right after the destruction of the temple, and he was actually part of the Bar Kokhba revolt. He was a very big fan of Bar Kokhba and a supporter of his. So he lived, just after the first and second century. The first century, after the destruction of the temple.
Okay, thank you.
So this is all to explain this Omer. There's one more idea that I think is the most, I guess, relevant to us, because we didn't have the Omer count anymore in the temple, right? We didn't have the actual sacrifice, and we do still have the count, but Shavuos has a set day on the calendar we're all going to do anyways for the most part. So what's this time period about? And there's a beautiful idea that is actually the Jews left Egypt as undeveloped people. They were slaves for centuries, for generations. And now they're going to become God's people, ambassadors of God in the world, get a Torah assignment. There was a lot of inner work they had to do to be worthy or ready for that, right? So you can take the Jews out of Egypt, but they had to go through a process to take Egypt out of the Jews. And these 7 weeks leading to Sinai were weeks of inner work and reflection. In the Zohar, it says that there are 7 primary character traits we have. And each one of these weeks, we're working on a different character trait. The first week, chesed, kindness, giving, sharing. That's a character trait. How good are we at that? And so working on ourselves, that's the first week. Second week is the opposite. Severity, boundaries, holding back, being, restricting ourselves, limiting ourselves. The third week is about Tiferet, which is harmony and beauty. And then Netzach, the week we're in, is about overcoming struggles. Then comes Hod, and then Yisod is about communication, and Malchut, the last one, about being leaders. So each of these weeks, we're focusing on a different personality trait, which is working towards being better people. They did it then, and we do that every single year. We go through that same process of working through. So it's actually a time period of growth, which, if you look at the calendar, it's an incredible, the Jewish calendar, how it works. The first month, Nisan, God came and took the Jews out of Egypt. We did this already, like a gift. The third month, the Torah, we met God at Sinai, he came on Sinai, another gift. In the middle, we have to do the work. This is a time period where we're doing the work. We're not celebrating a holiday. It's not like come eat matzah and come eat cheesecake. It's be better people. Go through the self-reflection, and the inner work that we're doing. That's the 7 weeks. Now, each week has 7 days. And this is where it comes to, we mentioned before, we count the weeks and we count the days. And actually, the Talmud and Jewish law says you have to do both. So, for example, if it will be the 30th day of the Omer, last night was and today was the 30th day of the Omer. The way you make the count is today is the 30th day of the Omer, which is 4 weeks and 2 days. So we do both, count the days and we count the weeks. And here's why that's very significant. The weeks, we work on an overall character, right? Now, I've never met a perfect person before, right? I've never met a perfect person. Someone who say, I have perfected my kindness, my chesed, my giving. It's almost an impossible task. So to say that I've done this week is about, overall working on this character, we do our best, we're never going to get it. But we work on it. What we can achieve is every moment being kinder. I have a choice right now. Should I give or not give? I'll give. I still had a struggle. I wasn't a perfect person, but I made the perfect choice in that moment. So we can always make the right choices, even if we're not perfect people. The weeks represent fixing the character. The days represent the individual sort of choices we have in that character. The actions. And so even if we're counting the weeks and we're kind of it's optimistic or altruistic, I'm going to better myself in this regard. But we also count the days, saying, until I get there, during this process, I want to make good choices, even if I'm not a perfect person. So even though I struggle internally, and my thought, my speech, my action, that can be always directed in the right direction. That's the weeks and the days we count. So that's the Omer we're in right now, and we're in the middle of the weeks and we're working on ourselves. This is a time period, and that's the reference here in the Torah. One more really interesting detail I want to highlight in this passage. Doesn't come across in English so well. In the Hebrew, it's much clearer. If you look at the beginning of the Hebrew, we read here, "Usfartem lachem," count for yourselves, "mimacharat hashabbat," from the day after the day of rest, or Shabbat. Start to count the day after Shabbat. How would you understand that? You would think, read it literally, start the count on a Sunday. The Omer count started on a Sunday. Now, the calendar doesn't always work at Pesach on a Sunday. Right? So the rabbis understood, no. It means Shabbat, he means day of rest, actually refers to Passover, the holiday. And so we start the count the day after Passover, the second day of Passover. That's the understanding of the rabbis, and they have different proofs for that, why that must be the reading here. There was a group in Talmudic times called the Bayis Susim. The Bayis Susim were a fringe or break-off group from the traditional Judaism who did not subscribe to rabbinic interpretation. And they understood this verse literally. We start the Omer count on a Sunday. No matter what, it's always going to start on a Sunday. Which means Shavuot will always be on a Sunday. And they actually had a sort of a rationale. It said, Shavuot is the only holiday in Torah, the Bible, the one-day holiday. Rosh Hashanah also is, but it wasn't a pilgrimage, right? Festival. Shavuot is the only pilgrimage festival. It's one day. Passover is 7 days in Torah. We do 8 now. Sukkot is 8. Shavuot's 1. So they said the reason Torah wants Shavuot to only be on a Sunday is to give you 2 days of rest, 2 days celebration, give you a long weekend. And so they asserted that it's supposed to be on a Sunday. And the rabbis were vehement, were very strong. It's an incorrect interpretation. It has to be a day after Passover, which is how we follow today. Now, the question I think that I'm bothered by is both ways. Is why is it so important to start on Passover, not a Sunday? Why were the rabbis so adamant about their interpretation? The flip side, if it's a Passover, why wouldn't Torah be more clear and say on the next day after Passover? Why say Shabbat if you don't mean Shabbat? And here's a beautiful interpretation I recently learned that I think sheds light on this, on the whole Omer period that we're in, and what it can mean for us today. What's the difference between Shabbat and holiday? There are many differences. One difference
Between
is
I'm sorry,
sorry,
difference between Shabbat and what? You broke up on the side.
and holidays and
Okay,
festivals.
great. Thank you.
One key difference between Shabbat and festivals is that Shabbat is set in stone in the cycle of creation. Every seventh day is going to be Shabbat. Nothing we can do to change it. You can't move the days. It's the cycle of time that we have no control over. But it's imposed on us. The holidays are calendar dates. And as we discussed earlier, the calendar had some flexibility with the new moon. Depending when people observe the new moon, when we set a new month, that decides when the holiday is going to be. And so the people, us, had some kind of control over setting dates of holidays. And if needed, it could sometimes be manipulated. They added an extra month for a leap year, depending on the season and the weather and whether spring has come yet. There was some room for manipulation. And even if not, it still was human interaction with the calendar. There was this human element where we are involved. And in fact, in the blessings we make in the prayers, on Shabbat we say, "Blessed is God who sanctifies Shabbat." On the holidays we say, "Blessed is God who sanctifies the Jewish people and the holidays." We add the Jewish people. You know why? We're involved here as well. We're a part of this process of setting the holidays. And so holidays have human involvement, our own efforts, whereas Shabbat is imposed on us. Now, our Omer accounts, where we're trying to do growth, self-work, does that fit better with a Shabbat framework or with a holiday framework? Holiday. Right? Shabbat's basically telling me, follow, do what you're supposed to do. God said so, you do it. I'm imposing this on you. You have no involvement here, no choice in the matter. You have no investment here. You follow. That's a Shabbat modality. Holidays is I'm part of this process. Yes, I'm serving God, but yes, I'm finding my own place within it. I'm working it to make it relevant and meaningful to me. And so the rabbi said, if we're doing the Omer count, which is leading to Shavuot, where we get to the Torah, you have to highlight the involvement of the Jew, the human involvement. That's a fundamental part of Torah. It's not just about following God's script. God wants us to be co-creators of Judaism. We have to also be involved in its unfolding of Torah wisdom. We have to be involved in making Torah relevant and meaningful to our lives. And so the rabbis were adamant. The count of the Omer has to be associated with a holiday, not with a Shabbat. But then why would Torah word it as Shabbat? Maybe just to confuse us. Sometimes I think, Torah is just like testing you. Make sure you have the right commentaries or else you're going to go astray, right? And sometimes, a teacher in a textbook, you might do that just to make sure you're listening, right? But perhaps it's something different as well. Shabbat has its own advantage. The steadfastness set in stone of Shabbat means Shabbat has some kind of sacredness that holidays don't have. There's certain holiness of Shabbat that overrides holidays. For example, holidays, there are certain things you do on holidays. You can carry in the street, you can cook, can't do on Shabbat, right? So there's certain allowance we have holidays. But in general, Shabbat, because it's set in stone and sort of part of God imposing himself on the world, it has this transcendent status. And so maybe Torah wants to say, I want the calendar to be associated with the holiday, but I want to give you the strength of Shabbat. I want to also give you the steadfastness of Shabbat. And we have those two things working in tension or in tandem, where the Omer is time for our own involvement, our own growth, but with the energized by the concrete steadfastness of Shabbat. And just to recap here, and give it sort of practical ramification or consequence in our lives. We're on this journey from Passover to Shavuot of getting ready to be the optimal Jew, the optimal human being. For God to say, I have a Torah for you, I want you to be my ambassador in this world of morality, of spirituality, of Judaism, right? And it's a 7-week process of growth, a journey towards growth, counting each week, and then within counting each day. And that's our work for us. But there has to be this constant balance, and this is not only in this period, but Judaism in general. This tension between following and being a servant of God, if you will, of being an observant person of this is what Judaism demands from me, and being my own person, an individual. I think differently to you. I value different things. I operate differently. We're different people. So if we're all just following, we become like sheep. We lose our identity. We're just like part of a pack. God doesn't want that. He didn't create us to be different, to make us the same. We're meant to be different. We're meant to appreciate Judaism differently. But that runs a risk of like everyone doing their own little thing. And there's no real centralized Judaism. What I find meaningful is this, you find meaningful is that, and nothing matters anymore because everything's good. We have to find a middle ground where the framework set in stone. There is a sort of Torah, give us a structure. Within that structure, we personalize it. We make it meaningful to ourselves. We work through it on a very personal basis. A very simple example is a prayer. Prayer is a very deeply personal thing. You're praying to God, it's your relationship with Hashem, you're speaking to Him, very personal thing. Prayer in Torah is referred to as worship of the heart. It's a very emotional thing. But you open a Siddur, a prayer book, and everyone in the room has the same text in front of them. We're following the same script. So are we just following the same script and saying the same words? And like robots, this is the prayer. God knows what I need. Really? You know what I need? The rabbi knew what I need. They knew my life. So this tension, but it really works hand in hand. There is the text of the prayer, which kind of is the overall framework. But when I'm adding in my thoughts, even in my talking, adding words, I am investing my own prayers into this generic text. So the one time is a generic framework, and within that framework, my prayer should look, feel, be very different to your prayer. Because it's my heart, not your heart. And that's all Judaism, where we have to find this balance. And that's all bottled up in the Omer, which is preparing us for Shavuot. Set up in a way where we have this tension and balance between Shabbat is being the framework, but the holiday is being the inner work. And that's why Torah specifically confuses us. The Omer count should begin the day after Shabbat, which really means the day after the holiday. What it really is about self-growth, about your own inner work. But what I want you the starting place to be is the sacred framework of Shabbat. It's immovable. And that's the poles we have to work between. And that creates the dance of life, where we're anchored in something real, authentic, and ancient, but also we're empowered to bring it into our modern lives, into our real world. We go either way to one pole, we lose out so much. If you're stuck in the past and being just following, then you lose out on yourself. You lose out on opportunities to make it real in today's world. But if you go too much to just feeling whatever makes me feel good and my own sort of creating God in my image, then you lose anything authentic about it. It becomes your own self-worship almost, where this is meaningful to me. What's it to do with God? Judaism? This is my religion. So we have to have that inner balance and framework. That's encapsulated in the count of the Omer, which is one of the themes of the Parsha this week. So that's it for today.
Hold on,
thank you for joining here in person. And again, I apologize for those that came early, came late. This week was not unfortunately, but things scheduling was complicated. Going next week, we'll be back to regular. One second, back to regular next week.
Right.
8 p.m. to 9 p.m. the Parsha class. So we're back on track. We're here in person and on Zoom, and there'll be proper refreshments and drinks will be set up properly. And just a reminder, Thursday night we're having Leg Omer. Also, one more thing, Sunday morning, we're having a breakfast at Bass and Bourbon, a wonderful kosher restaurant here, with Alana Newhouse. She's the founder and editor-in-chief of Tablet Magazine, a wonderful Jewish publication. And she was speaking about the ethics of journalism and Jewish journalism specifically, and media bias in today's world. So that's Sunday morning. Whoever can make it, love to see you there. Yes, a question.
Let's say we took all the tzaddiks in the world in the generation, and let's say that each of those tzaddiks were at the highest level of tzaddikim that you could possibly be. would they have different priorities? Would there be different priorities, or would they be on the same? Would there be different priorities?
Okay, I'll show you a
Going
question
back to
over
what,
here. Let's say you have the righteous people. Let's say who's perfect, righteous person. They also have differences, or they're all the same, right? They, as far as I know, I can't speak from experience, so you have to ask one of them. But I think they're all different. And just look at history. Look at the righteous people. They had different personalities. They had different modes of operating. So they were all driven by this, insane devotion to God. But it manifested differently with different personalities. So again, the goal is not to be a follower, not to be a robot or an angel, just shutting off yourself and just doing the right thing. It's to make yourself as best as possible. And each person's self is different. And so when you've perfected that, it's how they someone who's perfected themselves. Well, my perfect self is going to look different to your perfect self. They're both perfect, but they're different, and that's the key. If they keep our
would they
differences, but try to be perfect.
would they have different understandings of the same verses and texts, like Hillel
Absolutely.
and Shemini?
Look at the Talmud. Talmud's filled with arguments. Both great people sharing things that are both true in certain levels, certain respects, but they're arguing because from their vantage point of how they're perfecting their own understanding, this makes sense. And from the other guy, his vantage point and spiritual level understanding, this makes sense. And so absolutely there'll be differences of opinions, and that's the richness of of Judaism, where you have this diversity, and there are systems in place in how we navigate that in reaching conclusions, and some things that has to be conclusions, and some things we can remain different, but all part of the same structure. So there are systems in place to how to navigate that, but absolutely, each person is going to be different. And it's like, as a parent, you look at my children, and they each wonderful, very different personalities. And what the best they're going to achieve is going to be different for each one. What they need is different. But they're all doing great things, being themselves. I don't want them to conform. I don't want them to just be all follow the right thing. I want them to develop their own character in the best possible way. And God wants the same thing from us. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Sorry.